her at terriblebyjanine.com. Janine, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Hey, guys. Hey, everybody. I'm good.
Excited to have you on. And of course, please join me in welcoming my treasure hunting buddy, Ji3wWwu8mkrL. You can find him at Ji3wWwu8mkrL2 here on YouTube. Joe, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Good. Very good.
I'm excited to have you on, Joe.
Me too. I'm excited to be on.
It's going to be an epic show, Joe. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here live on this Rumble show. We're waiting for our guest to join us this evening. We're going to start laying down some track here as we wait for him to connect to the stream here. And so I want to say a big thank you to all of you on Rumble joining us. And I will be monitoring the chat as we go through some of the topics for tonight. And I might be able also to take some questions from all of you guys. So big thank you there for joining us and supporting us here on this Rumble platform. Before we start, I guess, Janine, let's set some intentions here for this show tonight. There's been a lot of hoopla over the last number of years around the Q movement, the Patriot movement, and then we've seen in earnest this last year, you and I have been discussing this a lot, there was a lot of infighting within the truther community and a lot of stress that was put upon us. And of course, it makes sense. We're in the spiritual fog of war right now, and we understand that. But at the same time, we want to share our intention with the audience tonight to be responsible with the subject matter, where we're trying to decode the nature of this transitory reality we find ourselves in. So can I ask you, Janine, maybe to pull some cards on setting the intention for the show this evening and for the respect of our audience members? Go ahead.
Wow. Big spiritual cards here. We've got using our intuitive knowing and coming with the presence of our intuitive knowing. So that's representing us. And this card here, that's the Hermit. So I think there's a lot of other dimensionals watching, and old souls and star seeds. We know that our audience is made up largely of star seeds, as far as I'm concerned. But I also think we've got other dimensionals keeping an eye on what we're up to here, and with that High Priestess to stay in that place of your most highest intention. So that's really encompassing the idea that we're all in this together and we're just trying to get to the bottom of what's really going on. We've got the Fool in the past. So what brought us together? I mean, it's really weird how even Jean-Claude and I met. And I don't know how you and Ji3wWwu8mkrL met. And I don't know if I'm going to say his name right, but I'll say Ji3wWwu8mkrL. Is that okay, Ji3wWwu8mkrL?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Just call that?
Okay. I don't know how you guys met, but it was just a series of really interesting things. And finally, Jean-Claude and I connected, and then it was really obvious we should work together. I feel like a lot of people watching even tonight, what actually brought you to watching this show tonight, or even watching Truthers. Like, it's been a really interesting ride to get to where we are, but we need to stay really focused in a more spiritual, higher vibration of this whole movement. And especially somehow tonight for maybe the subject matter or just all of us coming together. I feel like it's really important to keep the vibration really high and in a spiritual place. And interesting, this is all major arcanas, you guys.
Wow.
All major arcana. So the Strength card, to stay strong and help each other stay strong together. We're stronger together than ripping each other apart. And that was the Fool. So all of the cards are major arcanas. So even though this whole situation's unfolded over the last 3 years, and some people have been at this for 20 years, like unfolding the truth. But myself, I could only say the last 3 years, really, really looking at things in a different light. I feel like we're going to be a lot stronger at coming to the truth. Only together we're going to do that. Just individually, we got just little parts of it, but all coming together, that's how we're going to get to the truth.
I love it. And Joe was just telling me on the pre-show that he felt there was something above him watching him, and it was making him uneasy. And Joe, when Janine pulled the card about some otherworldly visitors here watching over the show, you kind of reacted. You want to share it to that as well?
Me tell her? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of need to go. I need to go back up a little bit and tell the short version of the story again. I was in Utah several months ago. It was a family vacation. and they were having once a year, they have like this treasure hunter, woo woo, whatever meetup. And it covers anything from Bigfoot to UFO to the Skinwalker Ranch, which is nearby, to treasure hunters, and because there's a lot of history out there and artifacts and things. And I went out there, and I'm like, well, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or whatever it was, I'm kind of doing my thing with my friend out there at this meetup thing. So I told my family, why don't you guys go to Salt Lake City? We'll rent another car. You guys go out there, have fun, and that way you're not wasting your time over here while I'm doing this, and I'll just do this. So I was at the other house that we rented Airbnb by myself for that few days. So I get out there. It's the first night, and I think it was Friday night, and it's time to go home. It's almost midnight, 11 something. I'm driving back to the house. It's maybe a 30 or 45-minute drive, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like talking. I don't know if I was talking out loud or in my mind. I don't remember now. And I'm like, please show me, connect with me. Show me a ET flying saucer, something. Give me a sign, And I remember Woo Dude telling me, be very careful what you say. We use the word connect with me. He goes, you remember when I got that thing in the back of my neck? He goes, that's the word I used. And I didn't mean that, but they take it literally. And I go, oh shit. Okay. Well,
you must use your words carefully with ET.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I was just like, I'd love to see something on the way home. Could I see something? I didn't see anything. I get back to the house, pull in the driveway, start walking towards the front door, and I start getting this weird, heavy feeling over me. And it's like, well, it's kind of like when I get one of these psychic dreams and I wake up and it's like what Woo Dude says, spirit is all over my ass, Spirit's all over my ass. I feel the energy. I can't go back to bed. They gave me a prophetic dream, and I just can't even go back to bed, which I had one last night that is extremely relevant to what we are going to be talking about.
Joe, we'll get to your dream a little bit later,
yeah.
but finish this segment quick. I just got a note from Juan. He's coming up on the screen here very soon.
Okay, great. So just quickly, I had this experience at the house.
Yeah.
Something that you couldn't see, touch, whatever, was there and connected with me, so to speak. And I had this weird feeling, and then I can tell it was a spirit thing, like what I get when I get these dreams, but it was different. It wasn't their energy, it was someone else's, and it was very uncomfortable. Yeah. But it respected everything I asked it to back off and do this and do that. It was doing it at my pace, and it respected everything I asked, because it was basically kind of like a contact experience. I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah.
That exact feeling is just started a little while ago, right when we just did our other show. As soon as I walked in this room, I sat down, I'm going, yeah, I know that feeling. Thank you. I feel you. And I felt like I was just having a little conversation with it a second ago when you guys were talking about its intentions and stuff. It's not bad. But anyways, let's go ahead.
Janine, do you want to pull cards on that? What perhaps message that entity has for Joe? And get some clarity on that. And guys, Juan's going to join us here in a couple of minutes. He just texted me, so we're just shooting the shit here, getting ready for tonight's epic show in the meantime. So please continue giving us the great comments and the questions in the chat. Go ahead, Jenny.
They're absolutely just trying to connect. Okay. They see you as a friendly entity energy, and they're just trying to make contact. So I feel like they got something they might want to share with you, so you could share it with your audience. They're looking for people to get stuff out there, and they're just feeling you out, whatever that energy was, just feeling you out to see if you were open to it.
That is identical when I called Woo Dude when I was in Utah, because the next morning, like I had another experience, because it was I asked it to wait till the morning, like let the light come on. You're making me nervous in the dark in this room. And it did, but it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay, here I am. And I'm like, no, stop. Like I could feel it again. So I'm like, I can't go back to bed. I end up calling Woo Dude. Wow. He says the exact same thing. And he goes, just ask it. He goes, I sense it's connected to you right now still. It didn't go away. I go, so do I. And that feeling is exactly how I'm feeling right now. Mm-hmm. And he goes, you're connected. Ask it questions telepathically while you're connected. See what it says. Mm-hmm. And I got 3, and then someone called me and it messed me up, and I was too late. So, but it answered 3 of my questions. And I just asked it some things too while we were talking a minute ago in my mind, and it kind of answered. But what you just described is exactly the words Woo Dude said. He said, ask it some questions. And that's one of the things I asked it, and it was like, we're just checking you out. Like, we're just you asked him, we came and we're checking you out. And he said,
who is this guy, Joseph of Snips? Who is this guy?
Yeah, dude, I asked for it, and it was kind of scary that night. But right now I'm like, well, I know this feeling, and it's a little uncomfortable, but it's like, it's just their energy. We vibrate here. They vibrate at a different frequency, I'm guessing. And theirs is more powerful. So I can feel it. And it's a little uncomfortable, but once you understand what it is, it's like, okay, I can handle it because I know what it is now. It's not so scary. And it's backed off to a level that's because they can get real close, and then it's like, okay, that's too close. Back up, please. Back off. And then they'll do it. And it's like, okay, thank you. And then anyway, it's not
while we wait for Juan to join us, did you want to also share, while we're on the topic of ETs and contacts, your last experience when you were in the Haida Gwaii? Something had happened to you there as well. Did you want to share that? Does that tie into maybe the feeling, the UFO contact you had there?
Oh, that was many years ago. You talking about that story I tell on the beach on the Haida Gwaii? Yeah, that was many, many years ago. I've had some since then, but that was one of the most profound ones. I was out in front of this little shack we were kind of renting, and no electricity, and there's no street lights. And I was on the smaller island of the two main islands. So very, very little artificial light. It was just pitch black out. Could have been a new moon or something. And all of a sudden a whole fleet, and it was literally like a fleet of craft, came into our view and started making formations. So they'd form different shapes. So you knew it had to be a fleet of something. And also they'd come really close and then move back so fast. All of a sudden they're little specks of light, and then they come really close and they were gigantic. And then so you knew that they were moving really fast when they were doing that. And because they could become gigantic all of a sudden. So it was, wow. We knew it wasn't any kind of army or military operation or anything. You just knew. And we stood there, myself and the father of my first child, that's Raven. We stood there. She was tucked away in bed, and we were just out in front, literally in front of the cabin. And this show was going on. Our cabin was practically on the beach. And the show went on all night, but we lost time. So we zoned out. We don't know, did they take us up in the craft? I don't know what happened. Time stood still to me. And all of a sudden we woke up, or we came conscious again or something. We're still standing exactly in the spot, exactly the same spot. And it was morning now. So we lost the whole night. Wow. We still talk about it. Yeah, it was wild.
Fascinating story. Well, thank you for sharing that. And of course, I see now that our guest for tonight's show is in the studio. So let me bring that up on the main screen for you guys here. Please join me in welcoming the kid by the side of the road, Mr. Juan Osaben. Mr. Juan Osaben, welcome to the show. How are you this evening, sir?
Oh, good. Janine and I sat right across from each other at the one of the events here recently, and then I had so many people asking questions and all that, we never got a chance to talk. So it was kind of one of those things I was hoping we were going to get a chance to visit. And then, of course, people know I have my fiance, Jennifer Mack. Jennifer just reminded me a few minutes ago, well, I was following Ji3wWwu8mkrL with the cryptos way before I was following Q, before I knew anybody. I was following Ji3wWwu8mkrL.
Ji3wWwu8mkrL is one of those common denominators here in woo-woo land. Of course, Cliff Hyde, Dick Algeier and company as well. That's how I got started. Janine was just
tell her I'm honored.
Yes.
Well, I just thought I'd pass that along. So you have a fan base out there, and so I get upstaged all the time by you guys, and I have to, what did Ji3wWwu8mkrL say? I don't know what. Well,
that's awesome. Thank you so much, Juan, for being on.
Let me just say this to him real quick.
Okay.
I got an incredible dream last night. I get these prophetic dreams from time to time, and it was perfectly timed because they knew the show was today, and it is going to be front and center of what we're going to be talking about. They gave me a dream on how something's about to happen, and this is going to be super interesting to talk about. Let's just say that.
We're excited
I
to
have
get
a dream
into
in my
all
book.
of that, of course. Juan, before we start, it's your first time here on the show. You're a very enigmatic character. You're very mysterious. People ask us all the time, Janine, JC, can you guys look into this guy, 107? Who is this guy? Where does he come from? Where is he going? All of that. So we have contabulated. No, what's the word in English? We've looked at all of these major questions that keep arising from our community base about this character 107, and there's one question that keeps coming up. So I figured we'd ask you tonight, and it's pivotal to everything else we're going to talk about tonight. And the question is as follows. The question is as follows.
Oh, wait a second.
Are those snakeskin boots?
Cream out. I better start putting the hand cream on. Now you got me scared.
I was gonna say I recognize those boots anywhere.
So are those boots snakeskin boots or alligator boots, man? That's the main question.
Oh no, these ones actually, I'll tell you what, I've got about a dozen pairs of boots, and I've been traveling so much, I had set some into storage, and I haven't gone back and pulled anything out here recently. I've got I was actually going to change boots today, but these are so comfortable, and these are a very pliable, soft calfskin that I really love. This particular pair of boots, and these were custom made. They're just so comfortable that some of the other boots I wear more or less, and they're for different kind of settings, if you will. But these ones here, if you watch over like the last 2 months, I practically have worn these almost the entire time. They're just too comfortable.
I love it. Well, in preparation for the show tonight, we've got some WebBot data, and we were talking to Cliff Lai earlier in the show, and I asked Cliff, I said, hey, Cliff, do you have any questions for Juan as he's going to be on the show tonight? And he says, yes, I do. And he says, I want to know who his boot guy is, Cal, a buddy of his, wants to make some custom boots, and he wants to know if you know a guy that can work by mail to create these custom boots.
Well, so I have a custom pair of boots that I had made for Jennifer and I for a wedding. Yeah. And I actually put off the wedding because I had initially wanted to do it October 7th, 10/7, 107. And then I realized, that was dumb, because I proposed to her back in May. And by the way, just for anybody that, just so you know, Jennifer's this beautiful and enigmatic, creature that we had a very platonic relationship. She had done some videos based on stuff I did back in other interviews, and she put stuff together and called it World According to Juan, and literally had done stuff with presentations I'd done, all audio, where she added the pictures to it. And she'd been doing that for 7-8 months, and I didn't even know she existed. And then somebody pointed out, did you see this? Did you tell her to do this? I said, no, I have no idea. So one thing led to another. We did the movie together, The Called. It was a very pleasant, platonic relationship. And then at some point last year, I says, look, the reality is I can't live without you. You're too intricately involved in everything that I've got going. Would you marry me? And she said, yes, so in a weak moment. And so I have some boots that were being made, and the theme that we wanted for the wedding was peaches, because I love my peaches. I'm famous for enjoying my peaches. And she grew up on a mint farm, and so peaches and mint. And of course, what do you make with peaches mint? Well, it's just like Trump. They tried to serve him impeachment. Well, he makes peachy mint tea and peachy mint ice cream. He enjoys his peachy mint. So we're in a peachy mint theme.
I love this.
But my boot guy, they do it with not lasers, but they have a very custom measuring device that you do in person. And then once they make that, and a lot of the, celebrities and all that do this. So they got like John Wayne's mold for his feet. They got a few other Western stars that are kind of heroes of mine from back in the day that all got done by the same boot maker in Houston. And they got them all hanging off the ceiling. And so they did mine, and then they can make boots from that. But I would just say to Cliff, actually, Lucchese boots are probably my favorite. And I've got a couple different manufacturers that I like, but the Lucchese, these are actually have the kind of the little stuff there that I like, the scrolling and like that. These are exceptionally comfortable. I don't think Lucchese actually makes a bad boot. And some of the other manufacturers, I don't think the fit and feel are quite the same. And then personally, and it is a matter of taste, if you're working on the farm, some places, a pointy boot doesn't quite fit as well as others. But if you're using stirrups, saddle like that, the pointy is just a lot easier to get in and out of. They do wear a little differently, and so it's just what I personally prefer. It's a taste thing, and I think Lucchese makes the nicest of those. So there's my advertisement for Lucchese. But
well, there you go.
I've had dozens and dozens of different boots, and I give them away from time to time just because I got too many. Lucchese is my favorite, and they're not ridiculously priced. They're actually fairly reasonable. I had one of my very famous Hollywood friends, and we were down in Fredericksburg, Texas, where they have one of their dealers that tends to get the one-offs and the first ofs and things like that. And so I ended up buying 3 more pair. He bought 3 pair, bought some for his wife and other stuff, just because they're that nice of a boot. They really are. So
there you go. So Lucchese boots, Cliff, if you're listening, if not, I'll send you an email after this.
And show. By the way, Cliff, I enjoy everything that Cliff does, and you have to kind of think about it. So much of what people are doing is they have a feeling, they're out there in the netherworld trying to search the way that they think things are going to go. He's much more. There's a certain sense or feel, just like a race car driver has to kind of feel what's going on with the car, but there's also a very mechanical aspect to the car. Either stuff is set right, it's adjusted right, it's in the right place, it's working the right way, or it won't perform correctly. He has a sense or a feel for the track and the car setup in the way that they're looking at the mechanics of these words, these phrases coming through the internet pipeline, through the, this mechanical side of the consciousness of our society. Yeah. And then the driver side of it is his ability to look for the proper words and phrases and see these trends that are hidden in the subconscious way that people communicate. I think that it's an art form. It's certainly like art itself. You can put the same palette in front of a dozen painters and come up with completely different looks. But he does a beautiful job with what's there of presenting a picture that whether he's right or not, he gives you enough information so you can also use your own intuition to go, well, I get where he's coming from. I get why he's saying that. I might see it a little more this way or that way, but he's giving you the tools to work with. And that's what I really enjoy about Cliff. And Cliff is doing a tremendous service. He's been at this for a very long time. There's plenty of others trying to do something similar. There's nobody that's going to replace Cliff. And I have, I'm a big admirer of Cliff and his work. So I want to throw that out there too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And folks, if you're looking for some of the WebBot data reports, we are going to be referencing them tonight later in the conversation. You can find them here. These were provided by Cliff. Unabridged, the original forms here at beyondmystic.net/CliffHigh. You can download the files there. Absolutely free. So beyondmystic.net/CliffHigh. And of course, you can find him on his BitChute as well. So thank you for that one. Quickly also, because you're here, it's your first time on the show, I usually ask my first-time guest the same question. And it goes like this. How did the universe conspire to bring you to doing the work you're doing today?
Oh, my gosh.
Juan, what would you say to that?
What's the wild part is that when I was very young, I mean very young, there were several people, men and women, who I was gifted to get to know at a very young age that put certain triggers in me, certain information. I was exposed to their way of looking at the world from a behind the scenes fabric of humanity, fabric of society, how things really work behind the scenes, not just what's in the press. And that laid the groundwork, even later when I got into the intelligence community and some of the stuff that I did in several veins early in life, where what was presented is what's going on and what you're going to do. I never was burdened with looking at these things the way it was presented to me necessarily, because I had enough history and I've been in the right places with the right people that I was always looking beyond what's the real story behind this, who's really behind this, what's the real purpose or motive here. And so it tainted in a positive way the way I looked at what I was doing and who was involved and what the machinations were. And I'd say that in this moment in history, that's what I hope I'm bringing to the broader community, is these other perspectives that may help people to measure, gauge, look at what's going on in the world with slightly different eyes, and think again about what they're being told is happening versus what's really happening. And I hope that's what I'm adding to the conversation at a national, global level.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Juan. It sets the stage, of course, for the conversation we're having tonight. Janine, let's start here. We're 25 minutes in. There's a lot of impatient people in the chat wanting to hear about this SCOTUS loaded weapon. I apologize for that, folks. We're setting the stage here for this wonderful conversation, and it's our first time having Juan on the show, so we wanted to set the tables right for everything. Janine, speaking about putting things on the radar, you have a big community here, of course, at tarotbyjanine.com, where people feed you intel and emails and questions on a daily basis. How did this SCOTUS story hit your radar? Let's start there. Set that up for the audience.
Yeah, I got several emails, and in particular, 2 really well thought out and written emails that described everything. And it's come to be the truth that everything the way it's been presented was described to me in these emails. So these must have been people really doing their homework. I hadn't heard a word about it until I got those emails. So I thank those people. They likely know who they are, and they might even be watching. And 2 different ones that literally practically said the same thing, that this was a long shot, and that this had been presented maybe even a year prior. There, it was like worked its way through all of these different, hurdles, I guess, and
lower courts.
Lower courts, exactly, and made itself all the way, sort of almost unsuspectingly, to this place that it sat last week. And since then, it's actually moved. I guess there's a date when they're going to decide if they're going to talk about it or not talk about it. The Supreme Court. I mean, I'm generalizing, and of course there's way more to it. But yeah, I got it from Digital Soldiers, and I was so appreciative.
Now, you and I got these almost at the same time. We were talking about it, and our first reflection was like, oh, here we go again. It's the carrot in front of the donkey. It's one more moving of the goalpost. A lot of us in the community are frustrated with all of that. But at the same time, we looked at it and said, it appears there's something there. We didn't want to be manipulated or be part of a meme generation type of event here, or a meme propagation study here from the intelligence agencies. But we thought there was enough to look at it there. And I sent some information that you had shared with me and that some of our guests had sent to me to Joe for conversation. And that sparked something and a big interest in Joe, because within a few minutes, he was putting out this video here, which was very much promoted by the people community, where Joe was reading out loud the sequence of events in there. So Joe, let me ask you here, for the audience members who perhaps don't know anything about what we're about to talk about tonight, can you maybe in 3-4 minutes here just break down a synopsis of what this court filing looks like and where we go from here? How did you hear about this, and where are we at now in the whole story?
Well, this weirdo texted me this image. That's you. No, not a weirdo. He texted me this image of a conversation like, hey, this case, the Supreme Court case, it's actually got to the next level, it kind of started our conversation. And I'm like, I think I remember hearing about that, and just, people are following it, whatever. So then it started like, okay, it's actually got some traction. And this Supreme Court case is not in and of itself about election fraud.
Right.
The case is about other people bringing their concerns of election fraud and evidence, apparently, to the Congress and saying 2020 was a fraud. Please look at this. 100 or so Congress members, whether that's the House and Senate, said, "Yep, we need to look in this." They all just so happen to be what I like to call good guy Republicans, real Republicans. And of course, the Democratic-controlled House and Senate were, we're not going to look at it. I just buried it. So they're supposed to look at something like that once the allegation is made, and they have to look at it. They have 10 days to go over it, this and that. They didn't do any of it. So these guys, the Brunson brothers, filed I think it was 3 different lawsuits. One was in Utah, one was somewhere else. It got caught up. That one got hung up, and then they went to the Supreme Court, made some changes, and it started getting its way through there. Not the most recent thing, but what triggered me to do that video was about, this, there's a docket number. They didn't just kick it out yet. It's like, it's kind of moving in the right direction. And then instantly I just get this reminder. Remember when Mike, the pillow guy, Mike Lindell, it's going to be 9-0. I'm telling you, 9-0. And then he said it again in 2022. What about 2020? Where's the 9-0, right? Why does he keep saying this? Yeah. While he's smiling on TV, 9-0. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I think this is where we're going with it. It's going to get traction. So we do the video, I did the video, we're talking about it. And you can see November 23rd, their lawyers who represent the Congress members, one was removed or recused or something, went away. Someone else is appointed. They don't respond at all, which typically you're going to get a response. One of those Congress members are going to send their lawyer, somebody to do it. If that guy doesn't, hey, you need to respond to this, just kick this thing out, something. And they didn't. So now it moves to the next step. And we just got the latest update that it's going to, what do they call, I was supposed to say a meeting essentially of the justices to determine, are we going to go ahead and rule on this or not? And the date they chose is January the 6th. That's the latest. So again, timing, coincidences, this thing, that thing. I mean, you couldn't write a better script, man. This is when this is all said and done, this is going to be the greatest movie ever told, ever experienced in real life. It's a real life movie. You're not just watching Hollywood create something on the screen. It's going to blow any other real movie off the face of the earth. This will be the number one thing if, when someone maybe recreates it as an actual movie.
Well, some would argue that the White House or the presidency is operating from a Hollywood set, but that's maybe for another conversation.
Castle Rock Studios.
Juan, let me get you into this also. I just mentioned how for a lot of people in the community here, they feel disappointed. They might be fatigued a little bit from all of these dates moving forward and this feeling that we're always chasing this carrot, but it never seems to show up. What do you say to all of this right now? It's interesting to see. Jenny and I have been saying for the last number of years, we are the cavalry we're waiting for. We don't want to wait for anybody else to do the work. Humanity needs to take charge and to stand up. But a lot of people are saying, oh, well, the SOC is going to do it, as though the White Hats are doing it. So trust the plan, JC. Don't do anything. The SOC is doing it, what Cliff High calls the SOC, the self-organizing collective. What do you make, Juan, about this here? This bifurcation of, yes, there's the SOC working in the background, and here we have 4 brothers coming together on behalf of humanity to put a case forward that, for now, seems to have a lot of traction. Why?
Well, okay, let me mention a couple of things. It was 2 cases, not 3. They ran in parallel. There's 4 brothers. The brothers were trumpeteers, by the way. Their dad was a pretty well-known professional trumpet player, and then wanted them to, continue with the family business. And he actually paid them to practice their trumpets. Of course, then they became very good. They were on Johnny Carson and opened up the Rose Bowl, did football games. They were actually out and around quite a bit. The deal about this case that makes it very unusual and unique is that the Supreme Court usually gets petitioned to look over 5,000 to 8,000 cases a year. They only actually will hear or review 150, 200, maybe in a big year, 250 cases. So what's unique is back last July, these cases were bogged down in the 2nd District Court and in the 10th District Court. The one in the 2nd didn't look like it was going to get loose. The one in the 10th, the brothers, Rolland is really the guy that knows this case law the best. And by the way, this is no attorneys involved. This is all pro se. It's very Americana. Just regular citizens doing what they know to do the best they can to try and fix this. And you mentioned like Mike Lindell, he's doing it from the pillow side. My groups had the largest candidates coalition in the country coming up on 2022 with secretaries of state, AGs, governors, the whole schmear, largest coalition of candidates in the country. And then we had the largest election integrity group in the country. We did 20 election integrity conferences around the country, looking at the dynamics of how elections are done, what happened in the 2020, what was going to happen in 2022, and bringing people up to speed. So we look at all these things, and the Supreme Court in July, when this case was bogged down in the 10th Circuit, the brothers noticed the Supreme Court because Rollins saw something. The brothers were arguing, how can we get this out of the 10th? They're just going to sit on it forever. We'll never get anywhere. So he said, you know what? On the basis of a national security threat or issue, we could bypass the 10th and go to the Supreme Court. So they noticed the court that they were coming with this suit, and then they started to perfect it. Along the way, the 10th Circuit found out these guys were going to bypass them on a Rule 11 issue related to national security. And so the 10th Circuit suddenly issues a ruling. Now, you can't appeal to the Supreme Court until you have a rule from a lower court. You can say they came to the wrong conclusion, you need a higher court to overturn them. So the 10th Circuit wasn't going to do anything, and the case was going to be bogged down. The Rule 11, national security, they were going to bypass them. So the 10th Circuit says, okay. We reject your case. It's not valid. It's frivolous, and we're not going to hear it. That gave them an appealable issue. The Supreme Court had actually contacted the brothers, and when it was still in the 10th Circuit, and says, yes, we actually want to see this case. Do you need any help? Do you know how to put this together that meets our criteria for receiving a case? This is completely unheard of. Almost never. I mean, I have several within my candidates coalition and with my election integrity forum. I have several people that teach law at major universities. And so we reviewed this. One of them is a constitutional law professor and also a Federal Reserve law professor teaching in those specific areas. And looking at this, and he says, I don't know of any case over all the years, I'm sure they exist, where the clerk of the Supreme Court has actually called a plaintiff and asked them if they need help bringing it to the Supreme Court. And this court did that. Now, when they got close to filing it, the 10th Circuit changes the rules because no, we're going to reject the case. That gave them then an appealable issue. It didn't have to come under national security. They talked with the clerk of the court. Court says, yeah, don't send it to us that way now. Change it back to just an appeal of the 10th Circuit's ruling and do this and this and this. How soon can you have it to us? And the Supreme Court is asking him, the brothers told him, well, we could have it maybe in a month. Could you get it here any sooner? Well, maybe 2 weeks. Oh, that's really a long time. Okay, well, that probably still works. Please hurry up. So they got the case ready, had it sent and delivered on Friday, October 21st to the Supreme Court. Then on Monday, the 24th, the court noticed the defendants that they had the case and that they were looking at it for review. So the defendants then know officially, you have 30 days to present your side of the case, your defense. The plaintiffs want their case heard here at the Supreme Court. You got 30 days to tell us why we shouldn't pay attention to it. That's the 30 days that ended on November 23rd, at which time the Solicitor General of the United States, who had taken control of the case for the defendants to represent all 388 defendants, 385 senators and congressmen, representatives, and Mike Pence, Harris, and Biden. So the Solicitor General is representing all of them and notices the court, we're not going to present a defense. And we're not going to even try to argue this case. Now, there's two ways you can look at it, because they don't believe that it warrants a response because it's so frivolous and lame and whatever that they're not even going to waste time, or that they couldn't come up with a defense that wouldn't then give extra ammunition to the plaintiffs and make their case worse by presenting an arguable thing that
Right.
the court says, yeah. So what was interesting here was when the court was advising them to go back to the original way of appealing the case, the clerk of the Supreme Court advised the brothers to include in their appeal what the defense would say or argue if they wanted the case dismissed by the Supreme Court. Literally to make the case for the defense why this case should be dismissed. And the brothers included that as an option for the remedies that the court could find in resolving this suit if they accepted it. So literally, the other team's defense is included in the plaintiff's case.
Now, it's fascinating, Juan, how the court is. It's fascinating, Juan, how the court is really stepping outside here, way out on a limb to help this file going forward. Explain to the audience members how that perhaps ties into Roe v. Wade and how that really opens up a rat's nest here and an attack maybe to come here on the Supreme Court. Tie that in for the audience.
Well, so the deal is, what's the background? Why did the court seek this case out? The context is Roe versus Wade happened early this year. The Congress and this administration, democratically based, the Democrats are very pro-abortion, and this was an attack on their platform as a party. And most of the candidates, most of the people that are defendants in this case were pro Roe versus Wade. This court did something actually a little bit similar with Roe versus Wade to what they've done in this case. Every year for 50 years since Roe versus Wade became settled law, there have been cases in those 5,000 to 8,000 cases that are brought to the Supreme Court every year that tried to argue for reversing Roe versus Wade. But the court wasn't receiving those cases. They weren't listening to them. They weren't going to revisit Roe versus Wade, so the cases just languished and disappeared. The Supreme Court wasn't going to revisit that area of law. This court decided to take a case out of all those cases. And courts, a lot of times they might take a bunch of environmental stuff. They might take a bunch of stuff on energy or contract law, something they might see in the cases out in the various circuits, kind of a common theme where there's struggles going on to define law. So they'll pick a case here or there that kind of encompasses a number of things they're seeing. So rather than take 10 cases, they'll take one case that kind of has a little bit of everything in it and fits where the demeanor of the court, where they want to go. And, the justices, it takes 4 justices to agree they want to hear a case, to then docket it, and then go to what we call conference. And so this hearing date that has now been set for January 6th is what's called a conference, where the 9 justices look at the case, and then they decide if they're actually going to hear the case or not. And you need 4 justices to decide that they want to hear the case, to docket it and actually have a hearing, an official date, etc. Now, here's the tricky, sneaky part. This is the part that people haven't quite caught yet. This is the gut punch that nobody sees coming. When the court asked the brothers to bring this case right away to them on essentially a national security emergency basis, and then the 10th Circuit Court intercepted them and said, no, just we're denying it. Now you have an appealable issue. Then they modified it and brought it to the Supreme Court. It was still sought out by the Supreme Court as a matter of national security, and they wanted to expedite it to the court on an emergency basis. And the context is, when the court did Roe versus Wade, there was all sorts of attacks on the court, including internally, leaking their communications internally and where they were going with the decision, to try and cause problems for the court members. Last spring, you might remember that it was arguably that Justice Thomas and his wife were poisoned, and became very, very ill as an attack to try and take Thomas out as a conservative member of the court. The court, actually, the conservative members who voted Roe versus Wade have their security has been raised radically since then and stayed that way. So you have members of the court that are conservative that are a bit under attack, and then this administration, not Biden, he doesn't even know, what planet he's on. He's like Nebuchadnezzar out, wandering, he's the king of Babylon. He's wandering the desert, doesn't have a clue he's an animal or a beast or whatever. He doesn't know what's going on. The people around him in the administration, because the presidency isn't a person, it's a whole team. That group wants to control the court, restrain them, because they consider this court a rogue court, first of all, for taking a case related to abortion law, and then for deciding to reverse 50 years of settled law. They consider this a rogue court. So what they're proposing from the administrative side is packing the court, putting a bunch of people that are liberal on the court, and then offsetting the conservative members of the court. And packing the court's been talked about by administrations repeatedly over the last couple hundred years. Nobody's actually done it, but this administration is saying they want to do that during this lame duck session. Post-election, last time these members of Congress meet, they pack the court. The Congress is saying they want to put in term limits for justices, and kick Thomas out and stuff. They've got their solution. So both the administration and the Congress are staging, and they've been telegraphing that they're going to attack this court. So the court is now fully defensive. So last summer, knowing that, they were under attack, going to come under attack, under potential attack, they start moving this case along. October, racing it along. Now, with what's happened, it's not technically on the docket, but I've had, the lawyers, we've talked about this extensively. In fact, Loy and I are going to be over at Mar-a-Lago on Sunday together, Loy Brunson, and we're also going to do some meetings in the area Saturday and Sunday and Monday. And so we're going to have some fun with this. But the court is reviewing this case. They've been reviewing it and aware of this case all the way back to when they urged the brothers through the clerk. The clerk's not acting on his own. His office isn't doing this because they just want to do it. They're doing it because a justice or justices have directed the clerk of the court. They know the cases that are out in these circuit courts. They kind of review what's in the pile periodically, supervising the regional courts. They know this case is out there. They needed a weapon to protect themselves from what they consider a rogue presidential administration and Congress that want to change the balance of power in America and want to attack them personally, potentially. So they needed a weapon of defense. So they bring this case up, which, if they were to decide in favor of the plaintiffs, the Brunsons, would mean that 388 members or people on this thing, 385 members of Congress and the Senate, and Pence, Biden, and Harris would no longer qualify to be in public office. Therefore, they must leave office, and it's not that they're arrested. People have to understand this. All this does is say that they're not suitable for public office because they didn't protect the Constitution. Well, what's the Constitution? What do you mean they protect it? Because the Constitution is the contract between the people and its government. And the Constitution lays out the parameters for how government can work and do things related to the people, taxes, how laws are administered, etc., including the election. The election has to have fair representation of the people. Ted Cruz and a number of senators, 100 members of Congress, Senate, and legislature said there's something wrong with the election. It appears that there's foreign interference. Director Radcliffe, the head of Homeland Security's overall intelligence operation, Director of National Intelligence, there's 16 intelligence gathering agencies. The 17th supervises all of them. That's the Director of National Intelligence Office. So NSA, CIA, FBI, DEA, NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. All of those different groups are administered by one office, Director of National Intelligence, and that's Radcliffe. Radcliffe, 42 days after the election, said publicly there was Chinese interference in the election. The only question is how much weight to give that interference. And there's disagreement between the various agency heads, FBI, CIA, etc., as to how much weight to give the information, whether it overturned the election. 45 days after the election, when he was required to present that to the president and to other agency heads, he didn't do it. He was in defiance of an executive order that he provide that intelligence information to the president, these various agencies. That's when my buddy Pat Byrne went to the White House with Mike Flynn and Joe Flynn and Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, all these various people, and argued that Trump should sign the Insurrection Act. And Trump initially agreed after 5 hours of conversation. Then overnight, we know now from the January 6th testimony, President Trump met with generals out of the military, conversed about this overnight, and they advised him not to sign the Insurrection Act. And the reason is because just like Lincoln, when Lincoln signed the Insurrection Act, it deployed the military and led to civil war by degrees for America. And so Trump didn't sign the Insurrection Act because it, by degrees, could have led to civil war. Was the advice. The country was too closely divided. What's happened in the interim is the country has had enough time to see how this administration would operate, to see the truth about what's going on in the elections, and especially here with the 2022 and all the angst over, machines that don't work, people's votes aren't being counted, the courts just running roughshod over them, not wanting to hear anything about the mischief going on in the vote. Wow. And so just to pull all these pieces together, now the public, and this is where someone like Cliff High comes in, now the public, a large enough percentage of the public is in agreement, not because they're Trump people, not because they're Republicans, but because from a broad consensus, whether it be how the financial markets are going, how the energy situation is going, what's going on, whether there's vote fraud being allowed and pushed by certain groups, whether the medical side is a certain way, all these different directions, whether we should be deploying the military and getting ourselves set up with NATO to go into a nuclear war. For various reasons, the public has begun to coalesce around the understanding that the real threat to their life originates out of Washington, D.C.
Right.
And so the number, when we look at this consensus on a couple of different ways, the numbers that we look at solidly moved about a month ago, over 80% of consensus within the public that Washington, D.C. is out of control, that something's wrong in the government of the country. People coming at it from different directions, not all Trump people, not all people in the financial community, but a broad consensus is now gelling. When you broach past 80% in some kind of common agreement, you don't have civil war as a possibility so much as civil unrest. Civil unrest, we can survive. Mm-hmm. Civil war, America, in this state that we're in, the way things work, the business of America being business, at closer to 50%, or some variation, 2/3 or something like that, you have the makings for America coming off the rails and disappearing into the trash heap of history.
Right.
80+% we can hold it together. So this case, now you look at the Supreme Court justices, the balance of power in our government is threatened if they reduce the power of the justices against the administration and Congress. The weapon that's now been put into the Supreme Court's hand, this loaded gun with a round in the chamber, the trigger cocked, aimed at the head and the heart of the administration and Congress, if they so much as pass gas that they're going to do something to clip the power of the court, they don't have to wait till January 6th to decide to then have a meeting in February or March and issue a determination in June or something. Here's the sneaky part. Because it's a matter of national security, and they originally reviewed it as an emergency, at any instant, the members of the court, it only takes 4, can call for a national emergency conclave. They can review the material, which they're already reviewing it. Anybody that thinks the court's not familiar with the material, they've probably already got aides writing their arguments or disagreements on this case. And there's no requirement for a public hearing where both sides get to present. Well, oftentimes cases, the court doesn't do any kind of a public hearing, let both sides present their arguments where they can then ask the attorneys about it. In this case, because the defense rested essentially and said, we're not going to provide a defense, there's no reason to give them another opportunity or ask them because they already said they didn't want to. So the court could move way faster than this January 6th date. They don't have to, and the general logic would be that the court's just going to plod along, and nothing's going to happen. I can tell you I've talked with numerous very connected people, real histories, insider government, and they've all said it's hopium, nothing's going to happen. They're just going to, plod along. They may or may not take this case. I don't think they're going to take it even after the justices hear it. Nothing's going to happen. It's just, you're just being strung along. The only reason the court did this was kind of to, let Congress know they're there and, kind of taunt them a little bit, but they're not going to do a thing unless Congress really does go off the rails or something, and they don't expect that. But then there's another component to this, and this is where I think even what J3wWW has with a dream, things that Janine might see, and everybody in your audience here, there's something different about the texture of this particular case, this exact moment in American history. There's a sense in the air that something has to happen and is about to happen that's nonlinear, that's not predictable. It's like the handwriting on the wall with Belshazzar. And they're having a party. Everybody's there. All the guys in their Ferraris and their Rolls Royces, all the administrators from the whole kingdom of Babylon. They're all having a great night. They're having fun. They're all drunk. And out of nowhere, the handwriting on the wall, this disembodied hand starts writing. This administration, out of its mind, this Congress ready to go to war with the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court calmly goes out, finds a weapon, puts a round in the chamber, throws the magazine in, and points it at him. Really? Really? Remember, this is the court that did something that for 50 years nobody touched. Settled law on abortion. You think this court won't do something unexpected, unpredictable? You have a majority of justices who already showed that they could do something nobody saw coming. I don't think you can dismiss this court as unwilling or unable to pull the trigger. You push them hard enough, they'll do something nobody ever believed in a heartbeat could happen.
Right. We feel like we're living in this weird powder keg moment. As soon as the Republicans took the House, on the next day here was the announcement of this investigation into the Biden administration. To some extent, we're also having to look at whether or not the FBI itself, DHS, have interfered with the election. We're seeing some of the back doors to Facebook and to Twitter. And we're seeing in Brazil, like this uprising right now. And I appreciate the number you just talked about here, the 80%. And I know that you've been talking about that for the last year, about getting to this number where we could survive this altercation or this big change that is before us without losing
consensus. There's a level of consensus that is gelling that the other think about the remainder after 80%, this power number 19.5% or something,
right,
is, if you actually looked at it, split that number in half of that group are there because it was cool, they're along for the ride, they're pretty dedicated, all their friends are there, they've got this history there. But if they see 80% of the population suddenly becoming verbal, flamboyant, not afraid to push their view because they've been pushed far enough and now they're pissed, about half of that remaining 19.5% will just fade into the woodwork. Then that remaining probably less than 10%, who are the true believers, who are totally militant, they're never, ever going to stop. They're never going to drop it. Yes, they're a significant number. They're a serious number. But you have drawn the lines, and that 80%, they're not passive. They're actually fairly pissed. It's even like the court itself. The court had to have a lot of internal resolve to decide first to take a case related to abortion and then to rule as they did, knowing that this was going to be so disruptive. There's a certain amount of resolve there that you can't just, it's not situation normal. These are nonlinear events. And another nonlinear event is, to me, more likely now than ever. And that's where the stuff like a Cliff would bring in, where you're looking at the way that people communicate, the subject matter they communicate, the intensity of the terms. Even if you have cooked the books at Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and you say, well, the number's now 60-40. Okay, but then you've weeded out such a large number who've just gone other places. You're not getting an accurate number. But now you can look at the ones that do remain there, and there's an intensity that helps you to understand that momentum differently, and you can kind of adjust how you're looking at it. When we look at those numbers with the intensity added, we know a little bit more about how the community, how the consciousness across the country is. And then you look outside, even out into the world in a more generic sense, it's not just Brazil. China is in the middle of huge demonstrations and riots and pushback in a very tough environment. Canada, Australia, other places around the globe, the people are becoming more and more incensed and militarized, and that group, that under 10% that's on the other side that is very militant and militarized, when the wave comes, and it's like a tsunami wave, it's every man for themselves. This wave is so all-encompassing that you could have civil unrest around the country, but this is a very big country. And those people that want to push back against the government, push back against, say, a Donald Trump coming in and Congress being out, the reality is the natural response by these individuals will be to congregate in their own group. They will self-localize. We say 14 communities around the country is where they'll, the usual suspects, the usual places, they'll aggregate in those locations. And now they're actually not as hard to contain and shut down. they actually in their localizing, because they want to hang together, will make it easier to deal with them. They're not spread out all over the country. The few problem places you have here and there, again, America's a big place. Mm-hmm. They will not, at 80+% of consensus, something's wrong at DC, and then the court takes action. You would say, oh, there's going to be, the whole country's going to come unglued. It's going to look like Brazil is right now, with everybody on the streets. Actually, because people are so pissed off with where this administration is going on so many different issues, against the will of the people, and endangering the people, endangering their livelihoods, stealing out of their pensions and retirements with inflation, things like that. The reality is you could remove those 385 members of Congress and the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then Biden, Pence, and Harris. You could remove them all out of office, and you might actually hear a collective sigh of relief across the country. It'd be like the war that nobody showed up for. Right. Okay. And by the way, it's not just the 388 named in this suit. If you take them out, you actually probably remove, with their staffs and everybody else that supports around them, you probably remove 10 to 15,000 people out of power in DC. And if you remove those 10 to 15,000 that are directly employed one way or another with those people there in DC, the other thing is, you probably take 20 to 30,000 people out of DC that are in the supporting roles of lobbyists, attorneys, all the support personnel around all of those people in their offices. You literally turn Washington, D.C. into a ghost town overnight because there's no work for them. And who are these people going to appeal to? The Supreme Court makes the finding. Right. They're out of power. They don't have any. They call the police department. They call the Justice Department. They're out of power. Go figure it out. You want to come back? Take you 50 years. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hold on a second, Joe. You're going to need bigger barracks at Guantanamo Bay. And what you're saying also about this 80% in this consensus, what's interesting to me and encouraging to me also is what's happening at Twitter and this labeling of all of these fake bots that are creating this warped sense of reality to us. So imagine what that 80% could look like when these 60,000 banned accounts come back online and some of these bots are deleted. So I just wanted to add that. Joe, go ahead with your question.
Well, Juan, I'm a master of listening to someone throw out buzzwords. When I hear buzzwords, my little brain goes, oh. And I'm just going to say, I've heard some buzzwords coming out of your mouth tonight. Oh. And it just made me think of a question. Is there, in your opinion, is there a possibility that another type of event could happen, not that Congress decides to stack the court, but some other event that triggers the Supreme Court to get in a hurry and rule on that?
Well, okay.
Hold on,
the
Juan.
Supreme Court is not...
Juan, just a sec. The reason we're saying this here too, we're leading into the other segment. You just mentioned Cliff High here and his WebBot data and some of the analytics coming through it. He's been looking at a target date here for the last 2 months of December 13. Now, he had clocked in November 12th, emotional spike, and that was around the FTX debacle. What he's seeing now is December 13. Now, Juan, you just said also that they don't have to wait till January here. Do you see something coming up also perhaps around December 13 to lead into Joe's question? Go ahead.
Well, let me answer both Ji3wWwu8mkrL and what Cliff would say there. I think I do have the answer. Remember, none of this happens in a vacuum. In the way that this history is evolving, there's currents and subcurrents. I have my boat. I just sold it here a few weeks ago. And you're out there. And I used to do a lot of sailing. And so on the surface of the water, the wind may be blowing a certain way, and you have all sorts of obstacles, land and stuff like that may allow it to be stronger one place than the other. But yet you have a rudder and a fin in the water, and there's other stuff you have to consider. Which way is the tide going? Is the tide coming in or going out? Am I going against the tide? Am I going sideways to the tide? Am I closer to an area where there may be underwater currents? So, for example, I had a particular section I like to fish out in front of my house. Was on the water years ago. and there was a current that ran about 4 knots right along the shoreline. And so I could literally park my boat at one end and just coast down and fish. And I'd race my hydroplane back up and I'd come back down floating with that current. But that was where the salmon wanted to run along that shoreline. And on top of the surface, it looked dead calm. But the water was moving with that current underwater. Sailboats, you have to think of where the current is, and captains are looking for the current flow based on underwater features and things like that, which way they're going. So all of this isn't happening in a vacuum. There's subcurrents going on. What is the subcurrent that's happening right now? How would Congress, knowing that the Supreme Court now has a loaded weapon pointed at them with a full magazine, how would they react if they want to take a defensive move? They might need a hostage. They might want to do something that flips the bill and makes it look like they're protecting America. They're the ones, and they're hoping to rabble rouse, to agitate that 10% to work and function closer to the 20, or maybe even get past that 20 to 25 or 30, where they got a real shot at maybe having power again. And what's that common consensus they want to raise? They want to arrest that guy right there. The Megador, Trump. Yeah. And in fact, 3 days ago, we saw a movement of personnel and equipment near to Mar-a-Lago that would fit a scenario that was gamed out, that was inked about a month ago, where there's a certain sequence if you were going to arrest Trump. Agencies that have to be notified, procedures, all sorts of things. And that was set in place, was ready. Actually, about a month ago. It was actually 2 weeks before that period for preparation. And it's been sitting there, appears to have been reactivated. Now it's in position. So the question is, would Congress, this January 6th committee, now do, Navarro was arrested, the attorney, because he wouldn't comply with the January 6th committee. He says, you're not a lawful committee, you're a star chamber. You're not constitutionally set up. So I'm not going to comply with your order to come testify and bring, documents, etc. So Navarro was arrested, cuffed. They did the perp walk. They made a big spectacle out of it, kind of like they did with Roger Stone, and charged him. Then Bannon, he was called. He told him, gives him the middle finger and tells me you're same thing as Navarro. You're not a legal entity. You shouldn't even exist. You're not constitutionally formed. So yeah, I'm not coming to testify. So then they arrest him. Now Trump has said the same thing. I'm not going to come testify for you, and I'm not providing anything. What's Congress going to do? They want to arrest him.
Okay, yeah. So if he's arrested, in your opinion, would that be the trigger for the Supreme Court to go, time to pull that trigger?
Well, an arrest is an irritant, but you're in a Mexican standoff. You're at the OK Corral. If you actually pull the trigger in this Cold War kind of a scenario, it's a mad policy, mutually assured destruction potentially. And if you're the Supreme Court justices, even between the justices where you have left and right, conservative and liberal and all the other stuff, you do have to be conscious that whatever you do next will be remembered in history as the greatest evil or potentially the greatest good that could possibly happen. You could be, Kennedy was afraid that the CIA was setting him up to be the guy that killed millions, starting a nuclear war at the Bay of Pigs. Johnson went mad because K-129, this Russian sub, came down and was going to fire a nuke on Honolulu, March 11th, 1968. The largest intelligence operation in the history of the planet, the most expensive one ever, was the Clementine Project with Glomar Explorer picking up a Russian sub off the seafloor. And that was the basis for opening up China, because it was going to simulate a Chinese attack on America, Pearl Harbor. and it was a Russian sub, and people, globalists in mind, that wanted to start this global war. Johnson, when he realized he was being set up to take out China, it drove him mad. That's why he didn't rerun in '68, and he withdrew from the candidacy. And then later, became a marijuana smoker, grew his ponytail and everything else. It drove him crazy. So think about this Supreme Court. Would you trivially, frivolously make that next move, even if the other guys have a hostage? Is it worth taking the chance on starting, a global conflict that takes out America out of the whole thing? Or will they be pretty measured? And when they do pull the trigger, it's like what happened in the friend of mine actually was the one that came up with the sight situation where you get 3 greens and 3 snipers rifles all fire at exactly the same moment because they've got the bad guys in their sights at the exact same moment at sea, firing away. Would the Supreme Court wait until they know they've got everything, all their ducks in a row? Bam. Would they wait till, say, Trump is at a safe location? Because he's the one that they're going to make president. If they do this, Trump becomes president instantly. Is he actually under physical danger, or is it theater in the meantime?
Yeah.
And they hold, waiting for just the right moment, even though it looks dramatic, it's threatening, it's whatever. I think the Supreme Court justices, both sides, all sides, are more measured and calculating, and they would wait for exactly right. Might be spring, might be months and months. Then again, there's this nonlinear sense of this moment. Could something we aren't anticipating right now?
That leads me into a question
something
for Joe. Anticipation. Joe, let's talk about that dream you had last night here, how prophetic it may be. Let's put it on the record here.
Yeah, it's tying right in. He's mentioning if Trump was arrested and this and that. So I've been asking my spirit guides, if you will, because I can go to bed at night a lot of times, ask questions, and get answers. When it comes to cryptos and stuff, it's not all the time, but I get it, and I'm waiting for a certain price on something. So I'm asking about this crypto, and for days and days now, I'm getting nothing. All of a sudden, last night, I get this incredible dream. It's everything to do with what we're talking about right now. So they're like, yeah, forget your crypto. This is important. You're going on a show tomorrow. A lot of people are going to watch this. Here's a dream you can talk about. And I woke up with that feeling of, as Woo Dude says, spirit was all over my ass. I couldn't go back to bed. It was like 4 or 5 in the morning last night. And of course, we immediately wrote it down and emailed it. In the dream, it seems like it was dark outside. I see President Trump standing there. And JC, do you happen to have that picture up of when we were talking about that earlier, where he's outside at night with the MAGA hat in his hand? You don't have that handy, do you?
I could look for it. Keep going.
And there's that one picture that's kind of floating around where he just looks like he was in a fight. Like he's been beat up pretty bad. This picture of Trump, but he's still standing. And it's just like it kind of made the internet rounds here recently of like he's human. He's not defeated, but he took some punches and he's still fighting. That one. That's kind of the demeanor, the face, what I saw. Okay. And he's just
By the way,
there.
that picture was taken when Trump returned from the hospital after having had COVID with Melania. And he says, yeah, it took some hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, and we were fine and had a
vitamin C, a vitamin D.
That was him walking off the helicopter back to the residence. So go ahead.
Okay. So he's standing there, and he's not wearing a shirt. Just completely does not have a shirt on. Strange. And whoever's there with me, because there's people gathered, like we all know what's about to happen in a few moments. He's going to be arrested. They're going to handcuff him. They're not here yet. They're on their way. They're going to be here any second. And he's just standing there waiting for it because he knows it too. So I walk up to him, and I put my hands around him, and I mean, I feel his skin, you know, I'm grabbing him, and I just give him this big hug, this real true hug, you know, like only a close friend could do, kind of a thing. Even though I don't know the man, but I still love him, you know. So I hug him and just let him feel this sincere, you know, I'm here for you. And I ask him, do you want us to do something about this? You know, in other words, do I need to get the people, if you know what I mean, and protect you? But I didn't say it like that. I just said, you know, and I was kind of whispering where only he could hear me as I'm hugging him. And I say, do you need us to do anything about this? And he quietly responds back, so only I can hear, no. Like, don't do anything, you know, let it happen. So I instantly start crying because the emotion of what was about to happen is still real. He's going to be arrested. I can't believe this. I'm hugging him and I'm starting to cry. And the emotion of real crying, real sincerity is there. But I noticed myself, I can't produce tears. And I've had dreams in the past where I was being shown some things or whatever. And just to quickly give you an example, there was a lady whose son's been missing for a long time. They're pretty sure he's dead. Someone killed him. I saw her crying and I felt the emotion through my body and I actually cried. So I know I can cry in a dream. No tears were coming out in this hug situation. So as I backed off of that, I realized why. Because he just told me, no, don't get involved. I already knew what that meant. Just let things play out. So I then back off. Here comes the feds. His hands were already behind his back waiting. And they arrest him. They start walking him. Of course, CNN and everybody's there. They got the hint, you know, just like Roger Stone. Hey, how did they get here? They're there. The mainstream media is there. Oh my God, President Trump's being arrested. There's people that were, of course, cheering, you know, the leftists. I saw little small groups of those people, and they seem to be younger people. And then there was a few people like me that were kind of supporting. You know, we didn't really do anything besides watch them, you know, walk away. And then I saw, without seeing anybody's faces, without knowing any particular Congress member or politician, there was a pretty sizable amount of them. I just got the feeling they're there. And it was like almost looking at their faces quickly, each one. And they've got that damn evil, shit-eating grin of, oh, we got him, you know, we got him. And it was like exhilarating to them. We got him. They're so into it. And of course, I'm sitting in the back going, I don't think you know what's really happening here, but by all means, CNN and camera and you guys do your thing. And then the feeling inside was, oh, I can't wait till you guys find out you're no longer in business. You're out of a job. You're out of a job, like the Dick Algar remote viewing and all that. So I woke up, couldn't go back to bed. I realized Spirit gave this to me at the most critical time. We're going to have one of the biggest shows we've ever done, live streaming. We're talking about important stuff here. Juan's going to be on. There's going to be a lot of people tuning in. They gave me that to say, share this with the people. Whatever it may or may not mean, it's just a dream. Share this with the people. And that's what I got.
Thank you, Joe. Juan, quickly, your thoughts on the dream, and I'm going to ask also Janine here to pull some cards on that before we get to the rest of the slide deck here. We have quite a few more things to talk about tonight. Your first reactions, Juan, to the dream. Oh, Juan, I think you're still on mute.
I had a dream, and I wrote about it in my book, and it was President Biden had stepped. I don't want to distract from Jason's, but essentially, it was in a church setting. It was theater. There was cameras there. It was similar to something that actually he did during COVID. And he's on the swing, went down through the center of the aisle, and came back. And the swing kind of turned. He looked over his shoulder, and hit a pew. He's coming back to the double flip, and his head hit the corner of a pew, and he landed right at my feet. I was at sea at the time, and it so shocked me. I mean, he was right there with his eyeball looking at me and his brains laying on the floor and everything else. It so shocked me in an instant. I mean, and I'm I'm not exaggerating. It was like a gallon of water came out of me. The bed was so wet, it was soaked, like you'd literally taken a bucket of water and thrown it on the bed. I sat up so shocked. I don't have dreams like that. Nothing that I remember like that. It was such a shocking experience for me. And I talk about it much more detailed in the book, that I couldn't even go back to sleep. I got out of bed. I went out in the back of the boat. I had a cup of coffee. I was there till the sun came up, just thinking about it. And I text people right when it happened, because it was so alarming, so disturbing to me. And it was all about this theater. And one thing that Jason had mentioned, the choir wasn't actually good guys. In fact, the devil himself was on the corner of this balcony where he had jumped, where Biden had got on this swing to swing down, and was going to step off on the front steps and do all this theater, and it didn't happen right. But his hoofs, the devil's hoofs, were actually in the side of this railing thing at the front of the choir loft. But the choir, when I looked closer at them, they actually had like blood coming down at the side of their lips, and I could see there was like blood on their sleeves where they'd wiped their faces on their sleeves in their choir uniforms. And I realized I wasn't in a church of God in heaven. There was something else going on. And there's more I describe in the dream. It was so shocking to me. There was a whole theater that was set up, and then it didn't happen the way they had planned. They had it all planned out a certain way, and something completely different happened. I think it's the same thing as what you're seeing, J-Sips, in that they have a plan. They think it's going to work perfectly. They're laughing. They're so excited. It's like Don Corleone says in The Godfather.
Every time you get out, they pull me back in. No, okay.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Don't hate your enemies. It clouds your judgment. These people so hate Trump, it clouds their judgment. They can't even think straight. We talk about Trump derangement syndrome, and that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
Is some kind of maniacal, they can't even think straight. They're so over the top. And so then you come back to the Supreme Court is looking at this theater, all these things happening. Will they, because they believe the threat is so great, things have gone so far off the rails, decide that they got to put this monster out of our misery? That this is the instant. It can't be allowed to go any further. It's so over the top. And you have to think too, even though it's not part of the actual decision, the justices are aware something's wrong over at the FBI, and they didn't do their investigation. They didn't let the Hunter stuff out timely. Something's wrong over at CIA. You had all these intelligence people who came out and said it was a classic Russian thing with this computer, and it was all bullshit, and that wasn't true. That we know that there's the bribery, the money laundering, FTX, Tremor, which hasn't even fully got the whole thing.
When you say Tremor, do you mean Tether?
Tether, excuse me, Tether.
Tether. Okay, so we'll make sure, because you said that in another show, and I go, "What the hell? Let me go search for that."
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Tether. Okay, good. Keep going more.
And so you have all these things in the background, including McAfee, who, the 32 terabytes that haven't been released yet because the crypto market went south, and so it hasn't gone up and triggered that first release to leak stuff out. So at the end of the day, you have all sorts of things that the justices may be looking at. That are they going to spare America? If you go after Hunter, you're really going after Biden, Joe. Why? Because nobody gave money to Hunter. Nobody put him on a board of anything because he's a rocket scientist. It was all payoffs and graft. Are you going to put America through that? Or does the Supreme Court look at this and go, you know what? It isn't exactly related, but there's other things in the mix, and we got to do this to save America. Or the drama, we've already had the Russian collusion thing. We've already had all this other stuff happening. We can't, for all these other reasons, allow it to continue. So they make that decision to just stop it all. It's this way, but there's a lot of other stuff in the equation when they make.
Well, I'm glad you brought up FTX. One, we're going to get into the the dollar segment here in just a moment. I wanted to bring up Janine just very quickly. A lot of people in the chat are asking Janine to pull cards on Joe's dream here. Janine, let me bring you off the mute button here for a second. Yeah, let's pull some cards to see if both Joe's dream and Juan's dream are similar in that respect of how Juan was explaining that, or anything else we can glean from the cards also. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was pulling them while you asked me that originally, so I already have them pulled. But so for Joe's dream, what he was being like, it was like Trump was trying to tell him something. He was trying to tell him that this is something it's one of the plays we had planned. So whoever arrests him is actually in on the, it's a movie basically. So we've got the movie card in the background. Things have already been planned out. This was one of the things they could have done or could do. I don't know if they all along planned to do this, or this was just something that they were going to play if they had to, but it was already planned. And so he's resigned himself to the fact that this is going to go down. Okay. But the people arresting him are in on it. And it's actually going to work to the advantage of the future plays. So it works to the advantage of, and these guys arresting them end up playing right into their hands, basically. So the people that make the call to arrest, they're playing right into it. And the people arresting them actually are in on the good guys' side. That's what it feels like. And it'll be a temporary setback. It'll make a lot of Trump lovers and patriots and, people in our community and people watching this video upset, but for a short time, because it quickly changes things and it changes everything somehow. And it allows a whole bunch of things. It's almost like it releases the Kraken, the good Kraken, and a whole bunch of things can happen after that otherwise couldn't have when Trump was not arrested. And I don't know how that is exactly, but that's what the cards are saying.
Well, his hand cannot be seen, I think, if we are going to be making a big move like that. That would trigger maybe that consensus number back to a lower number and maybe spark this fuel of not just civil unrest, but civil war. So thank you, Janine. I appreciate that. Let's get into the economic segment here. We have the FTX Sam Bankman fraud caricature here. We can see how all of this is money laundering, how there's a lot tied into that. Juan just mentioned how perhaps the McAfee stuff also ties in with the terabytes of data being unleashed here as a catch-22 against the cabal. So I think that's very interesting. And I love this particular one here, of course, the money laundering. But Joe, you and I have been studying here for the last number of years, not just the WebBot data reports with respect to the economy, but also what the remote viewers were seeing. And there's a famous remote viewing here made by Crypto Viewing, Dick Algeier and company, which was about the death of the dollar. So let me bring up that slide. I want you to read this for the audience members, set this up for them, and then we'll have a conversation about how this fits into the timeline we find ourselves in now. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and I did say I did get a hold of Dick. I said, Dick, if this happens, I've been telling people about this for so long. You got to give me the exclusive interview. He goes, yeah, no problem. So maybe we'll come on with JC and talk about it. Sounds good. So the team was targeting the death of the dollar. So they don't know what their targets are. They're given that number in the top left corner. That's all they're ever given, a number like that, and say, go remote view this. That's literally how it works. And then they come up with this scene that they see or multiple things. This didn't appear to be looking like it was the death of the dollar, but it was so powerful. Dick's like, I'm putting this in there, And if you read what he got, now you see these guys that are kind of, the guy in the middle is kind of hunched over. The guy next to him's looking down. They're kind of walking around like zombies, like what just happened? This can't be. You look at the words, murmur voices, smell carpet, government building, emergency meeting, shock, dismay, disbelief, ruin, catastrophe. How can we face this? This is a hallway in a big ornate building, power place. Reminds me of U.S. Congress. Men in suits gather outside a big room. They have shocking news. Some are bent over sobbing. disbelief, a sense of adjourning for the last time in a transfer of power. This, I mean, when I first saw that, this is going on nearly 2 years now when he did this. You know, I look at everything they do. I'm a subscriber on their Patreon, which is crypto viewing on Patreon. And everything they put out, I'm watching it, reading it, looking at it, because it's fascinating. And there's certain things that you experience in life that you just never forget. Like, you never forgot where you were on 9/11. And if you were around when JFK was assassinated, you know exactly where you were when it happened. And, you know, there's just certain events. This was not necessarily something like that, but this was one of those things that he remote viewed that had such power, you know, emanating from it to me. I never forgot it, won't forget it. Like, this is already in the future. It's a done deal. This is not going to be some weird thing he misses. This is going to happen. Me personally, I say this, I feel confident, even though I didn't even do it, but it just spoke to me so powerfully. I go, this is going to happen. How it happens, I don't know. And when I first saw that, I thought, oh my God, the entire Congress is gone. Oh, military takeover. That makes sense. Now that we're seeing some things with the Supreme Court, oh my God, it never said anything about the whole Congress. It just said there's some people in there in the hallways, a group of them, not real happy, sobbing, disbelief, you know, adjourning for the last time. How could they adjourn for the last time? Mm-hmm. Add the Supreme Court case on top of this. Oh my God. Check the box, check the box, check the box. And that's where I think we're heading.
Check this out, Joe. Dick sent me another slide that was part of this remote viewing. I had interviewed him last couple of years on this, but he had never showed me this slide. And what was interesting here, he says, not continuity of government, continuity of wealth, time to implement plans. Now, this leads into the conversation Cliff and I and you have been having for the last couple of years. We always understood that this SOC was trying to look at the bigger picture, but we weren't sure if they were really going to look at the financial system. And now we're looking at perhaps what McAfee was doing, perhaps what other players are doing behind the scenes. There's this idea of perhaps returning to somewhat of a gold-backed standard or bimetallic standard here in the United States. Juan, how do you see this tying in here, the economic component here of this transfer of power for the last time, this adjournment, and perhaps this implementation into this new world economy? What would you say to that, Juan?
Well, okay, so let's think about what is money? And if we're returning to something closer to constitutional governance, the original design that America had, the original blueprint. Guys used to talk about blueprinting an engine back to factory specs, the way it was to begin with, as opposed to all these variations they might have. If America's in trouble, and if the Congress acts and we go vote in new people, special elections, all sorts of things, we're probably going back to something closer to the origins and removing a lot of the clutter. In the monetary world, what dollar is it that's going to die? Is it the fiat dollar that's run by these globalists, of which our Federal Reserve is just a branch office? Mm-hmm. Or is it constitutional money? I believe constitutional money will do just fine. It'll do fantastic, which is what? Gold and silver, coin. And so constitutional money will have its value and move forward. And lots of people, when you look at people anticipating their, fiat silver and fiat gold, which is just certificates that, people are trading around, even cryptos. A fiat crypto is not near as safe as the real money, gold or silver. That's why a lot of the crypto operations are trying to go to a gold or silver backed crypto material, that has something tied to something tangible, not just in the digital world. So I think constitutional money will do fine. If you see trouble ahead, switch and get some, and classically, by the way, gold and silver, they neither spin nor toil. If you bury them under the bed, they don't do any work. You have to leverage it against real things. In fact, if I have a choice between a tractor and a gold bar, I want something that'll do work, that has value. But there's moments in time where you have to go to the curb. You have to get out of the way. You have to pause. And so gold or silver are a repository of wealth. They're a store of wealth, but they shouldn't be your permanent parking place because they don't make anything. They don't do any work of themselves. So it's a temporary location till you can get back to something that does work, that produces things, whether you loan it to people that do work and they pay you back a premium for the use of your money or value, or you invest it in the machinery that builds wealth, or the education that can make you able to operate the machinery in a positive way that makes wealth. And that's what America does. America makes things. It does business. And we invest our labors into things that do, that make things. That's why even with gold and silver, it's an exchange that we commonly accept for, instead of giving corn or beans or cars between each other, we use that because it's an accepted medium of exchange with value. But ultimately, the real goal is to acquire things, land, machinery, education, something that when you work with it and apply your energy, God-given energy and thought and human piss and vinegar, you can make something more by sowing the ground and reaping down the road than what you had to begin with. And gold and silver are just a temporary parking location. But in times of turmoil, times of real drama as a people, the smart thing is to move to the curb occasionally, get out of the way, and come back to fight another day.
As we move away from fiat money into perhaps more sound money or cryptocurrency backed by gold and silver, what do you see happening, Juan, with the Federal Reserve? What do you see happening with the IRS? Are those antiquated systems that we are going to remove from the organic economy of humans? Or are we looking at perhaps another round here of meet the new boss, same as the old boss? What would you say?
Well, the Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. Mm-hmm. It's a private banking cartel that a crooked, corrupt Congress sold out America during the Christmas break, during a lame duck Congress like we're about to have here starting today, sold America down the river. So, and then it was never corrected. Nobody ever reined them back in. So, the IRS was created at the same time in order to be the money collecting side. And by the way, the Internal Revenue Service is also a Puerto Rican corporation. Courts have found that the IRS is a Puerto Rican corporation. In fact, it was originally a Philippines corporation when Philippines was a territory. And so no more federal than Federal Express either. That's a hard thing for most people to get their brains around. It's the Grace Report and other things that go into some of the details of it with the money creation and all that. Mm-hmm. The very short version is at some point in the not very distant future, in some kind of a broader reset, that both of those institutions go to the dustbin of history. There will be some money to keep the federal government going. It'll be a much smaller federal government, but that's what lies ahead, especially if you have Trump back in power. And that's why
what about Texas?
Hold on, go ahead. The Texas Gold Depository. Hold on, there's so many questions here. Hold on. Juan, in some of the old Web data reports, Cliff had suggested that at some point here, after all of these systems break, we look at how the Exchange Stabilization Fund has really skewed all the asset values. It's a real Ponzi scheme we're looking at in these markets, and they're breaking at the seams right now. We can see that since the offset of 2019 with the bank reverse repos. But what Cliff had in his data was that at some point, the government would come back hat in hand to Reggie Middleton to perhaps use Veritasium or something related to his patent here to rebuild our financial systems. What's your take on that story, on how perhaps the government would look at a distributed ledger technology and perhaps the DeFi patents here of Reggie to rebuild our economy? Juan.
Well, I mean, a distributed ledger has lots of applications. There's ways that it makes a lot of sense, but not as money, not as currency, only as a recording of transactions and related to things that actually have tangible value. So, to the extent that they want to do it as though those dots and tittles on a computer screen are actually have real value, it only has value to machines, to computers. Dots and tittles, electrons are the food of these computers, the devil himself. So the reality is, in a world that we want to live in, occupy out into the future, there's going to have to be some connection to tangibles, and then the distributed ledger is just a way of safekeeping the data so that it cannot be corrupted, etc. But the other thing, and very few people in the crypto world want to acknowledge this or want to be bothered by this minute detail. You have people talking about quantum computers and all that. I don't really like the term quantum. It's not an accurate term when you get into the physics. It's something else. But first off, on the cryptos where we're sold this to begin with, you're going to be able to do transactions that the government's not going to be able to see, that you'll have anonymity out into the world, and no government's going to control you. Well, that's not true. In fact, one of my guys that was part of the team that actually put some of this together, 30 years ago, yes, 30 years ago, with the Bitcoin and like that, when he was doing the work they were doing, they made sure that before this was released out in the world, they could track every transaction going in and coming out. There was no hiddenness to it, and they had the ability to watch it all going in and coming out anywhere in the world all the time. So today, even where you think that you have a distributed ledger that is safe with certain types of computing that are now there in the intelligence world, literally it does have the ability to go out and change some of those distributed ledger accounts. And the only ones that aren't covered are the ones that are completely disconnected in some kind of a chain or device. But as soon as you connect them and go in to try and correct it inside the distributed ledger, unfortunately, the second you go in to collect, it can still be wiped out, destroyed, modified. And so even there is questions of the security, the stability, especially, one of the guys that's in some of these conversations regarding the vote stuff. And we had conversations just a few weeks ago on this. He can break 512 encryption. So, and he's doing that with supercomputers, but his contention is that where everybody thinks they're safe at 256 encryption, bullshit. He can break 512 and he doesn't break sweat. He says now that you have the proper tools. So when you say that even in the distributed ledger, with the way that you have to go into transactions to settle up accounts, etc., his contention is even there, it's not safe, and it will continue to not be safe as these systems get more and more complex with certain types of computer systems. That it's too long of a conversation from here, but very advanced.
You're picking up a whole can of worms there for a whole other show, Juan. But I understand what you're saying here. If you look at who owns the network or the network of networks, it's similar to the encryption machine could be good on the voting ballot at a particular poll, but where's that transmitting to, and who controls the satellite? So I understand that question. Joe, you had a question about gold, the repository in Texas. You want to go through that?
No, it was taxes. I was curious, Juan, do you think, back speaking of Abraham Lincoln, they said allegedly that he, the North and the South were running out of gold because of the war, and he created the greenback, which the government printed, assigned the value, didn't actually have gold backing it. I don't think they had anything backing it, but it was temporary for the war. But they realized, man, this thing works so good, we'll just we don't need to borrow money into existence and then, create bonds and pay back tax money essentially. So they wanted to keep it and just have the government do it. My question is, we also didn't have a IRS income tax up until 1913 or 16, when they, due to what they did in 1913. So how the hell did our country survive without taxes? So my question would be, if you were, a gambling man, would you say that the whole taxing thing is not going to even be here? We're not really going to be taxed in the future, or do you think we're going to have a flat tax at least, or because in all fairness, you don't need a tax, but when the government can just print money and if it's backed by gold, there's the backing. We don't need to do that. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, I actually do enjoy gambling a little bit, but I do it with on the numbers. I like the odds in my favor. Or I do it just for entertainment, but to look at where the odds are at. The country survived prior to an income tax based on tariffs on imported goods and things like that. The income tax actually early on was a tax on millionaires, and then it was sold as people bragged about the fact that you made so much money you had to pay income tax. And so it was a reverse sale. Oh yeah, I pay income tax. Oh, you must be really wealthy. Wow. Yeah, you can afford a Duesenberg. It wasn't until World War II where the workers were, being asked to help with the war and everything else, and a withholding tax was put into play. And then it was supposed to be stopped after the war, but it never was. And then they changed the 53 tax code and institutionalized all this stuff. And that's where a lot of these changes came in. It was a voluntary tax, and people, of course, in a wartime mentality agreed to allow the withholding, and they get these things in place. So what's the future look like? How is this going to get resolved out into the future? The country can issue tariffs or expenses for things. I believe what's actually going to happen here right now is you're literally going to have the confiscation of wealth, but it's going to be of those groups or persons that were engaged in certain criminal activity that was part of the skim or the scam against America and out across the world. And we're literally going to take this illegal goods and gains and property from these people and convert it to wealth for the American people, return the wealth to the American people. And that's going to be a long process. It's going to take a lot of time. There is some creation of wealth, but you mentioned also, Jason, the greenback. This is virtually unknown. After the Civil War, greenbacks were still being traded for over a decade. And the greenbacks returned better than the gold did. And so people preferred to trade in greenbacks for a period of time. And it was only because the bank, the U.S. bank came out and said, Treasury said, no, we want all the gold or the greenbacks. We're converting them and we're done from the Civil War. They paid all of them back with interest. They were worth more, and people valued them more after the fact than they did even gold and silver.
That's fascinating. One, there's a prediction in the Web Data of $600 silver. Now, when I interviewed Cliff High and David Morgan on this, Cliff had talked about we would see $600 silver when the corn is harvested. And of course, he didn't talk about the corn. He was talking about farm products. So agents, basically, what he was talking about. How do you set that into the timeline now when we're looking at these investigations into the Biden administration and perhaps the FBI for the interference in the election? Are we close to those agents being harvested back into the system here and that $600 silver? Where would you put that in the timeline, Juan?
Well, by the way, it's not really known at this point in time very much, but over a month and a half in advance of the closure of the silver window, back when they closed it, I had talked about that in public broadcasts that they were going to there was a change coming the way that the silver was traded, and then that you were going to have a churning of the silver market. You weren't going to see any radical changes in price. You were going to see it bouncing in a window back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, churning. And so the proper move was puts and calls on silver, and that they were just going to churn it. And the end result would be that you would increase the amount of paper silver radically, the fiat silver radically. And that's exactly what's happened. And of course, the silver window closed as I said it would. And they continue to churn it. The amount of real silver versus the paper silver is so bizarre, wild. Most people cannot even comprehend the amount of silver in paper that's out there. Now, the smart guys, the banks, have been converting their paper positions to physical silver for about 2 years now, and cleaning it off. At some point, and the price of silver, even right now, is right at the cost of production. So there's no incentive to go chasing silver. If you raise the price of silver sufficiently, it then becomes profitable to go mining for silver. And there's a lot of mines that have silver, and the U.S. has it. Mexico has it in great quantity. If you raise the price of silver very much, it starts to become profitable. If you raise it wildly, we have enough silver out there to meet demand. Canada years ago, about 15 years ago, they printed, I think the number was $100 million in silver 1 ounce coins. And they had a face value of 100 luni. Then they reprinted them a second time. And I always forget this. I might be wrong. It might have been 200 luni, but it was a high number. It was either 100 or 200 loonies. And they came back and they did a double dip and printed a bunch more. And that's never been released from the Canadian Treasury. And then they never melted them down and redid them. They're just sitting there on a shelf somewhere. And so the contention has been by the guys that have been watching this, that at some point they're anticipating the value of the silver to go to that level, or the value of the loonie, the Canadian currency, to go down to that level. And so then if there was not confidence in the paper, they would need something they could have confidence in that people could trade. And so here's this 1 ounce coin worth $100 bill, if you will, in the Canadian currency. Would silver go to $600 an ounce? Some kind of a spike or something, that's always possible. In a mania, you could have something go to wild numbers for a period of time, just like we saw with the Bitcoin go to over 60,000 and then collapsing down to 15, 16,000 now. You could have a mania, but very quickly realize that it's not like there's no silver out there. You just got to go decide, have the will to do it. And then even behind the scenes, the other thing that's occurred, it happened last March, I believe it was. A number of the people that I run with that deal with currencies, because I did stuff to take down the ruble in the Soviet Union, so I kind of have a little history there. And so a number of guys that I talked to pretty regularly, one of them came to me and says, hey, none of us can be able to talk to you here in a few days. And I said, oh, really? Yep, we've all been tasked and we're on a project. And so you're not going to be able to reach me if you got a question. So ask me your questions right now. And we had a little conversation, and then sure enough, they all went off, not just one, several guys went off the grid. But what they were working on was a specific project. I'm not going to give away the details, but that would essentially allow that you could monetize in the ground assets with a schedule for their production to an above ground material asset that could then be distributed. So you'd be buying something in the future. It's like buying your Tesla truck 3 years in advance, and then finally they show up with the Tesla truck, and you had an agreed upon price, and you get to be first in line for it.
If it doesn't catch on fire.
With materials, yeah, right, yeah. So it would give a way to put in the ground assets, tie your wealth to that, and then get a greater quantity because you bought early, but you didn't have physical possession in your hand. You still got a piece of paper, but it was a guaranteed contract for production, and it would allow the mining to catch up with the demand, and therefore would offset the speculative price hikes. It would stabilize and smooth out this rapid escalation to ridiculous prices, and still tie it to a tangible, but over time. And I believe that that's probably somewhere in here with the equations that we'd have to look at. So, silver is actually still pretty common out there, and you find silver anywhere you find gold in a certain proportion. And by the way, for example, down in Arizona, the first telephones and the good telephone system was all down there in southern Arizona. And what was the reason for that? Because that's where all the silver mining was, the hills and the everything, all those tunnels that everybody's smuggling people through. Well, that was all down there in southern Arizona because they were going after silver. And it was extremely wealthy in Tombstone and areas around it because they had all the silver mines. And these fantastic telephone systems that nowhere else in the country they had them. There, every building had a telephone. You call mom, you could do whatever, in New York. And why? Because the wealth was off the charts. Those deposits have been tapped, but there's way more where that came from. If the need and the desire develops, we can go out and go back to a metals-based currency very quickly. In fact, we have several huge deposits that are protected by our military that have not been allowed to be tapped, but are there just like we had National Oil Reserve, and we wouldn't allow oil drilling in certain places because we had big ships that required it before we had nuclear. And then they were slow to release those back to the use for the public. We have huge metals reserves that we know where they're at. They're very easy to get at, very inexpensive. They're right up on top, and they're sequestered under national security stuff. And by the way, if they had been mined at the times that they were located and tracked and mapped, they actually would have damaged the metals market so much that the value would have gone too low and it could have damaged the economy. So they've actually sequestered them to protect the value of the gold and silver. It's similar to what's done in diamonds.
Chocolate Mountain, the Grand Canyon. Man, this is music to the ears of Big Sweer and all of his research on where all this gold is in North America. Juan, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And in terms of silver, I just wanted to bring this up to the audience members here too. We're looking at this biggest deficit in decades here for this next year, 16% rise in demand for 2023. At any rate, we here, of course, we're big fans of holding physical silver in your own possessions. Guys, if you're looking for some deals here, these are from Miles Franklin, the specials given to the Beyond Mystic audience. You can find that at beyondmystic.net. We have the kilo bars here at $350 over spot, as well as the Kilo Valcambi bars at $400 over spot. So that's beyondmystic.net/silver. Man, there's so many things we wanted to talk about. We're running long. I think we should start rounding down the show here tonight. I want to ask Janine first, as we start. If we go back to the beginning of the show here on the Supreme Court case, a lot of people are asking in the chat, Janine, for you to pull cards on whether or not this is the event that triggers big change in the United States, or if there perhaps is another event before us that could completely flip the tables here on the narrative and how we proceed through these big changes that are ahead of our collective future here for humanity. And while Janine pulls some cards on that, I found the Jennifer Mac.com shop. I know, Juan, these are amazing. I'll get you to talk about this before we leave, but go ahead, Janine, pull the cards on that.
So there's things in the background that might take precedent, and I feel like there's something with more clout even that could, and it's already been discussed in the back channels and agreed upon, that could, I'm going to say the word Trump this. So it could even happen, it feels like, before anything happens with the Supreme Court situation. Mm-hmm. So not to say that that doesn't have some leverage, but I feel like something's going to come along and before January 6th, that actually changes things. And
okay. And Joe, your thoughts on that too? We've heard many times before in different boards this idea of having a very, very Merry Christmas. Tie that in also to perhaps this emotional spike value that Cliff is picking up here for December 13. And why don't we read, first of all, what Cliff had sent us earlier at the beginning of the show, Joe? I'm going to bring it up on screen for you guys. This is in context, of course, to December 13 and what seems to be being picked up here in the predictive linguistics. Go ahead, Joe, and read the slide.
Yeah, he says, this is from Cliff. I think that we get maybe he meant big pop on the 13th. That raises the emotional tones for the next 50 plus days as things overturn, not only in USA. And he writes it again, not only in USA. Also pay attention to what is going on in China. So the combination of the money crash, the Chinese demographics, and now the Chinese rebellion will basically mean like no goods from China after, say, 12 to 15 weeks, something like that. One more shipping cycle complete and we're done. Chinese warehouses already barely there with the CCP shittery, last 3 years. The other part is blacked out. We don't need to mention that. Oh, buy it now if you need it. He's telling you, buy it now if you need it. Buy it twice or more if it will wear out in the next few years. Real serious here. Or get used to going without. In World War II, from January of 42 onward, coffee became rationed, both by circumstances, then edict, then finances. Interesting history. I know of the Kona, actually Maui, coffee smugglers, but I digress. Anyway, if you were stateside, you were restricted to 1 pound for every 5. Yes, 5 weeks. What the F? Going to be that way for all us guys in the next few years.
We're going to have to buy some chaga instead of that coffee, Janine. For us coffeeholics here. Okay, Joe, reading that too, how does that tie in perhaps with your dream? What's your gut feeling? Anything else here that you want to share with the audience before we go? And of course, let them know here how they can find you on YouTube, and I'll bring up your Patreon as well. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I've had dreams about the food shortages, the price of beef going way up, which happened, but I don't think it started, and everything went up, but I think there'll be things that are like what I was shown in the dream was like sticker shock. Like, there's no way this is this much money. Like, they couldn't even give me the price of the meat until I got it to the register, and he had to ask his manager, why won't these 2 pieces in the middle ring up? They're big ones. Because we have to price them right now because everything's changing so frequently. I was like, whoa. And I had a dream not that awfully long ago where I bought a second freezer in the dream, because we do have one freezer now, like a regular chest freezer. And I bought another one and was just storing bread, just bread. I didn't want nothing else in there but bread. So I'm like, Evelyn, you think we should get I woke up, I'm like, I think we should get another freezer. I got this weird dream about storing bread. And so we bought a extra freezer, and I've been storing bread and a few other things in there, but mostly bread. Like they're just gearing us up for, they're preparing me. They give me this information. I then will share it, especially that kind of stuff. Crypto, I typically leave on my Patreon only subscription because I don't get it that often, but when I get it, it's phenomenal information.
And Joe, for the people who are just waking up to this and they want to educate themselves on crypto also, you have some how-to videos here on Ji3wWwu8mkrL. Which package are you looking at?
Just the middle one. The Crypto Woo Woo is all you need. The elite package is just for people who may want to private message me, ask me some questions, get a response, portfolio review, whatever, things like that. But you'll get everything that the middle one gets too if you're on the elite package. But mainly just the middle one is all you need. And just I write stuff down or interesting stuff. I get these dreams or crypto stuff. That's where I usually put it. And like I said, I would have put this thing with Trump, at least a little tidbit in there today. Like, you got to watch the show tonight because I'm going to break it on there. Juan's going to be there, for God's sakes. Like, this is that, but yeah. I had to leave the house and never look back. I was busy all freaking day getting back here as fast as I could to just barely make it in time.
Joe, you and I met 12 years ago now through a series of karmic circumstances. And Janine was just asking us in the pre-show how we met. And I always knew that you and I were going to do something, even though you and I have been treasure hunting, doing all this crazy stuff in New Mexico, everywhere around the world. But I feel that we haven't done yet what it is we're supposed to do. But I feel that much closer when we look at all of the events.
All this has to happen.
Yes.
Before we can go and start digging and getting to the mountain and all this stuff. Like we sensed it 2 years ago. Like, this deep state thing has to be taken care of before we can try all we want. We're never going to get in.
Right.
Until that's dealt with for some reason. We didn't know the reason. Right. But it's getting close. And I got a dream months ago telling me when your son is 3 or almost 3, go back. Well, I jumped the gun a little earlier and went in October and then got completely sidetracked. I took the helicopter out there. I'm flying over the place. What the hell's that? I think I found an ancient city. What is that? What is that? I was all over the place and I got nothing done. But I did see some crazy, awesome shit. And I do have some video I haven't shared publicly yet of this little ruinous site of whatever the hell this thing is. It's awesome.
Oh, cool. So, guys, you can check that out at Ji3wWwu8mkrL, Joe's second YouTube channel here. Joe lost his channel at the same time as me last time. I think it was on the Hunter Biden laptop thing we lost our channel. But lo and behold, it was true. So, guys, go check him out at Ji3wWwu8mkrL. And, of course, you can find him on Patreon at patreon.com/Ji3wWwu8mkrL. Janine. TarotByJanine.com, guys, if you're looking at getting into this amazing community. Janine, let's pull some cards here before we go tonight. A lot of people are still anxious. You and I are getting all of these emails of people not sleeping. They're feeling this angst. They're feeling all this dread, this energy going on. As Juan was saying earlier, we're at this very pivotal moment where anything can happen here. Any little spark could change everything, stepping on a branch, as he was saying. What can you pull from the cards here to help people navigate all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt? Maybe how to manage all of these crazy energies they're feeling right now, and the angst of the global consciousness here, being spooked, as I heard all of us together. What can you tell them on how to manage these energies, Janine?
They're going to have to stay looking at the really big picture. See this card here? This is looking way ahead and optimistically looking ahead. Wands are very optimistic, especially if they're coupled with a card like this. This is a really well-aspected wand card here. It's called well-aspected. And it says, in the very big picture, we're going to be more comfortable. So there's all this talk about we're not going to have the coffee we want. And that trickles down to some people, it sounds like, won't be able to afford food to feed themselves. Okay, but I get that in the big picture of things, we're going into a better time. Yes, there is going to be discomfort, absolutely, but not, I don't think, to the degree that people are talking about. I never get that. I always get. So we need to trust and visualize the kind of world we want to the positive, to help bring that in, to help attract it. Okay, because that card's all about trust. And it can also talk about other dimensional energies and energies that are here, like galactic helpers. There's all these words we can use. And I'm not sure exactly how that fits in, but it feels like that has something to do with the big picture somehow. So we might have some otherworldly help. Certainly, I feel spiritually there's a lot of help around us. So however you want to talk about that, some people say that's God. Some people say that's the goddess. Some people say, so lots of ways you could talk about it. But I feel like energy like that has our back. Humans will not be forsaken. We're going to be looked after in the big picture. And I'm not saying you just sit around, wait to be looked after, but you align with trusting that because you're part of that energy. Okay, so, and there's a lot of surprises along the way that we don't even know about that are coming to the positive. So I feel like staying with that vision is going to help you get through the hard uneasiness that's happening right now.
Very good. And guys, if you're looking for more of this amazing wisdom and also perhaps what the tower card moments are for gold and silver in December, go check out the Beyond Crypto Woo. The December report is available now on beyondmystic.net, as well as the Astro Woo Finance. These are the personal readings for the 12 zodiac sign, including tarot and astro in one reading. So again, check it out at beyondmystic.net. And you can find Janine, of course, at tarotbyjanine.com. Juan, before you go tonight, I thought we'd do something a little bit special. There's a bunch of people asking in the chat, why don't we let Juan ask Janine a question for the cards? So this is your chance, Juan. What's the burning question on your mind? And what would you like to ask Janine?
Well, I think the James Bond movie, and there's a sneaky scene in there where Bond is picking a card, and he picks out the
Juan, hold on a second. Hold on a second, Juan. Juan, you're breaking up, so I'm not sure if it's where you're sitting in the house. We could barely hear you ask the question. Do you want to maybe move the phone around or see if you can get another bar on your phone here, because we can't hear you. Let's see what we can
All right. That help a little bit?
Okay, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
James Bond movie is all I heard. Keep going from there.
Yeah, the James Bond movie, Live and Let Die. And there's a moment where Bond asks the girl, the card reader, to pick a card, any card. So she picks one, and it's the lover's card. And so, of course, then they wander off and do what they do. Well, as he's sifting the cards off the table, the whole deck is nothing but lover's cards. So he fixed the deck. And this moment that we're in right now, I feel like actually the deck's been fixed, because here you have the Brunson brothers, who are trumpeteers. And I've portrayed this whole scenario as a bullfight where Trump is the trump card in this Casino Royale game with the deep state, with these globalists. But it's not even just Trump. With the Supreme Court case, you have 4 wild cards. In a bullfight, there's 4 horns that happen in the bullfight, 1 for each round, first, second, and third. And then 10 minutes into the third round, there's a 4th trumpet. And here you have 4 wild cards that are all Trump cards, plus Trump himself, who comes in to deliver the kill shot. So is it possible in this moment that in fact the deck is stacked in some divine way, that no matter what the deep state tries to do, that we're seeing something where it's stacked a certain way? This is Casino Royale for the planet. God himself isn't going to let anything go wrong. He's brought the trump cards in. It's a full straight flush of trump cards. Does that sound like it could be the scenario we're in?
So that's the truth and integrity card. So yes. And it's because we've manifested it in the past, and we're coming to the moment we manifested. So it's already been manifested. So that feels like we've already dreamt this into being. So I'd say that was a big yes to what you just said.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's kind of fun.
Awesome. Oh, Jean,
sorry, I muted myself. There was an echo there. So Juan, same question to you before we go. Any words of advice for people here? Either they're the patriots, you're a little bit long in the twos, either they're the people here who are just very antsy and maybe dreary of all these weird energies, not knowing what the future has in store. What would you tell them here on how to manage these energies and perhaps manage the people around them also, Juan?
The one thing that I think we all have to be careful of is not getting ahead of the moment in time that we're in. As much as we're anticipating, we are seeing a change and everything's coming. Even 2023, a lot of people think this is over in a week or two, over in a month, over in 50 days. The reality is 23 is a number. Anything branded with the number 23, it affects the whole world. 23 is a world number. 23 chromosomes from each patient make a human. So in this 23 number year, I don't think that this is over, even with catastrophic, cataclysmic events. I mean, aliens landing on the White House lawn, or all of the 388 people out of power and suddenly a new group coming in. Whatever it is, there's still dramas ahead all through 2023. In fact, we passed the critical precipice moment in October that is on an annual basis the culmination of a number of events. And I don't believe that we come full cycle again until next October and November for the rest of the other foot to fall. So don't fall into a trap where it's all over in just days or a week or two. You may get through one wave of the tsunami tide, but there may be more than one as it sloshes, like water sloshing in the tub. And you need to be mentally prepared. I've described it as a near-death experience for America. There's yet a Cuban Missile Crisis type of event with the nuclear and everything else out ahead in the future. And so we have a financial, we have a number of things yet ahead for us as a people and as a nation. And by the way, the $600 silver, is it that the silver went up to $600? Or is it that the currency you're buying it with became that worth less? In a properly viewed world, the metals, the gold and silver, are actually stable in value. It's the things you're trying to exchange them for that go up and down in value. And so with that in mind, handle your affairs accordingly. Have things that have real value, not short-term value or that rot or go away. If I get coffee, I'm going to store it in a way that it's going to last till I actually need it, if it's a year or something, or 2 or 3.
I think I need to make a new Costco run to get more coffee and chocolate for Sarah and myself. Yes, and I'll send you a few cases also, Janine.
I'm a coffee addict.
Yeah, exactly. Juan, I have to ask you one question. I've got this big audience, of course, from Canada. Janine and I have a lot of Canadians who follow us. Ben the Rocks was in the chat earlier. He was saying, JC, you absolutely have to ask Juan about Canada. What was interesting in Trump's announcement there last week, he mentioned something about planting a flag on Mars. And there's a few people out there decoding that Mars, he could have meant Canada, where they film some of the stuff that is supposedly happening on Mars. What's your take on Canada? Where does it go? Does it follow the U.S. here? As Cliff was saying, it's not just the U.S. Are we destined to see the Five Eyes also maybe follow in this big world play that we're in now? What can you tell the audience members here of what you see happening for Canada?
Well, actually, the U.S. is in a fight with Great Britain. That's who our real challenger is for world dominance and the Commonwealth countries. And if you go from a scriptural standpoint, the end times are marked when the Antichrist, who is Prince William, has to leave the throne in Jerusalem in midway through this tribulation period of 7 years. And it's because of a threat that comes as on eagle's wings by the young lions of Tarshish. Well, if you got young lions, where's the old lion? Well, that's Great Britain. So who are the young lions? The United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And so there is some kind of an alliance there where we're tied together. There's a brotherhood there that somehow emerges out of all this. Australia is being pushed to outer space, the outer limits of their ability, willingness to put up with what's being done there from a political realm and legislated there. Canada is in a similar situation. And really, Canada and the United States are very, very, very close, more so than most people care to realize, even also up into Greenland. And so I do see an alliance there that emerges, and it's because there is pushback and a breaking away. They will not have leaders foisted upon them through frauds as though they're the true representatives of the Canadian people. And in fact, my book, Kid by the Side of the Road, the second largest consumers of the book, places that were sent, were to Canada and then third Great Britain. I know there is a resonance there with us and with what's going on in America, and we're going to see that continue to build out, is my belief, as it should be. There's a natural alliance there. We have resources here in the United States from a manufacturing standpoint, and even what we're going to do with our currency, our way of monetizing things, that Canada has these incredible resources, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of trade between us in order to build out each of our strengths in the mining world and things like that. We need Canada. Canada needs us. I'm looking forward to it. Love our Canadian neighbors.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And speaking of maybe the greatest adversary of the United States, I love this particular picture here. And also this one that Janine and I produced here a little while ago here in the month of September. So go check it out, guys, on pay-per-view if you haven't already seen this crazy episode. Juan, before we go, talk to the audience members about where they can get this amazing 107 swag.
Well, the JenniferMack.com.
I think we just lost Juan. Juan, you disconnected, or I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think he's in a bad spot again. I just heard a little.
Yeah. Juan, we can't hear you, man. Jenny, let's buy some time. What else can we look at here before we go quickly? You want to pull some cards on something else? We are going to have. Oh, I think Juan's back. Juan, can I hear you? Give me a mic check.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, and then the jacket. The jacket's just a blast. Yeah, the jacket's just a blast. And she did all of that art. It's very popular. And I think is whatever happens in the next weeks and months, that's going to be a statement piece that people are going to enjoy, to show which side of which team they're on and like that. So it's just a super fun jacket. It's actually one of my favorite things. And also the McAfee jacket. That McAfee art, oh my gosh. When I go into I'm going to talk about McAfee at some point in time. I just haven't had time. There's way more to the story than most people realize, and you crypto guys are going to have a lot of fun.
Joe and I would love to get you back on the show to talk about McAfee and how that ties into the crypto, the terabytes of data. We've done shows on this before, and we've had a few strikes on YouTube because of it. So we're happy to have you back on Rumble and talk about it. That would be a great second show. So much more.
I'll look forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Of course, this was the SCOTUS Loaded Weapon. Join us next week for one of the brothers. I was going to be joining Janine, Joe, and myself. This is going to be on Tuesday, December 6th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So just look at the schedule below to find that episode. And in the meantime, please do remember to like, share, and subscribe here on our Rumble channel. And you can find, of course, Janine at tarotbyjanine.com. You can find Joe as well here at jsnip4 on YouTube, and you can find me there as well on the third backup channel, Jean-Claude at Beyond Mystic 3, and check out the schedule here for the next couple of days, including this Nostradamus and the Vortex of Time episode that was pushed back to next week, as well as the Beyond Crypto Roundtable. I'm Jean-Claude at Beyond Mystic. I love you guys. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon. Stay on the line, folks. We'll just finish up the show here as we go. Take care, everyone. Au revoir.